really the core concept that I landed on was what I call develop daily. And it is this idea that I would argue the best thing you could ever do for your career is to set aside an amount of time every single day to stretch and to grow and to try new things. And so what I typically recommend is LinkedIn put out a sort of future of skills report. I think it was last year. And they had this big, bold headline stat that said something to the effect of, since 2015, every single year, the top job skills have turned over 24%. Think about that. That's like a quarter of top job skills every single year changing. And why are they changing? Because the market's changing. I call it the learning cliff. And I call it the learning cliff because for most professionals, when they leave their formal education, typically end of university, maybe they go to grad school, something like that. I describe this cliff that they fall off of, which is they had been spending a very large amount of time learning, and then they enter into the workforce and they don't continue that learning progression. They fall off of a cliff. So how do you continue to progress your career without just falling off that cliff? What you're going to do is you're going to leave your formal education, you're going to fall off that cliff, and then all of a sudden, your skill set, given the speed of change, given the new environment that we're in, it's going to start atrophying really quickly in a way that I think is going to start shocking folks as the speed just keeps increasing. I think it's become more and more surprising of how quickly your skill set goes out of date in a way that even 20 years ago wasn't the case.
Welcome back to another episode of the Career Starter Podcast. My name is Ashley Misquitta, and I'm your host. If you've already subscribed to the show, thank you very much. But if you're new, please go ahead and subscribe, because today, like every day, I'm going to be bringing you amazing guests, and we're going to uncover the tips and strategies that will help you get your dream job. And once you're in that job, help you launch your career and accelerate it like a rocket ship. All right, Stephen, it's great to have you on here. We will cover a whole bunch of territory here. We're going to talk definitely about career development, accelerating your career, all of those things that are right in the sweet spot of what you've been talking about for a while now since I've crossed your path. Yeah. So to kick things off, why don't we get you, if you don't mind, talk about your background, and sort of what you're doing, how you help people, and, we'll launch into a bunch of questions from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ashley, thanks so much for inviting me on the pod. I'm super excited to be here and hopefully able to share a few nuggets of, experience that are helpful for your audience. And so, my name's Stephen Mostrom, and I typically like to describe my background as a bit of a career experimentation or exploration, jumping around. And I think in certain ways that's given me an interesting lens into both, what kind of a modern career journey looks like for folks who are bouncing around between different skill sets, different fields, things like that. And also what it takes to pivot. And, if you're going down one direction and you decide to go down another direction, what goes into that? How do you set yourself up well? And I'm sure we'll get to this a little bit later, but, we are in a market right now where change is the new normal. And so I think having the ability to pivot is something that is valuable, especially for young folks who are still trying to visualize their background, their experience, and what that's going to look like. So for me, my career really started on a finance trajectory. I did an undergrad in finance at Arizona State. And at that same time, I took a job at JP Chase, big bank. I was in their mortgage department. And really very shortly after I joined, the '08 recession happened. And all of a sudden it was trial by fire. We were standing up, HARP and TARP programs. We're scrambling to try and help people save their homes. And there I am as, entry level, someone who was hired to do mostly data and admin. And all of a sudden, I'm raising my hand and getting opportunities to do some pretty interesting program stuff. And wow. So that really, I think, catapulted me into this mindset of, I think I might have growth potential in this space. I want to go explore more. So after finishing up undergrad, spending a couple of years at Chase, I went and did a dual degree at ASU. I did my JD, so I got my law degree, and then I also did an MBA at the same time. So really cool program. I was able to do both of those over about a 3.5-year period. And spent that time trying to figure out, okay, do I want to go more into kind of the legal side? Do I want to do some like in-house work with banks? Do I want to stay on more the operations strategy side? And ultimately pivoted into a leadership development program at Bank of America. And so what I really liked about that program, it gave me the opportunity to rotate between different business units, get a lot of different exposure, and, sort of a theme of my career, it opened up a door that I really never thought I would step through. And that was into learning and development. And so I think think when you and I first started engaging on LinkedIn and getting to know each other a little bit, I was in that learning and development career. I spent about 7 or 8 years at Bank of America and then pivoted to Silicon Valley Bank. And then I was there when SVB sort of imploded overnight. And so, happy to share that story, but it was a very, sudden kind of jarring experience, but also something I used to launch what I'm doing now, which is I'm an entrepreneur. I work full-time with my wife. I have actually moved in many ways away from L&D as a formal job. And now I work in marketing most of the time for tech and finance companies, helping them with their content, creating the articles, the blogs, the social posts, the ebooks that you see online. Our team is behind that. And so, that's a little bit about my journey. And sort of, as you can see, I'm kind of weaving and stepping through doors, in some cases kicking down doors if I have to, but it's been quite a ride so far.
No kidding. So it's like right in the heat of it all, both in '08 and then with Silicon Valley Bank, which was really, it was over a period of like a week, basically, that went from everything is fine to into receivership.
That's it. Funny enough, that was actually the week before my wife and I had a planned trip to Portugal for vacation. And so we're like packing our bags, getting ready to go on this 2-week vacation. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, is this company going to be around when we get back? And so, it was this very odd, kind of eye-opening experience. And ultimately, we wound up taking that vacation. It was sort of one of those things where it's like, okay, this is outside of my control. Sitting around here and sort of, being anxious 24/7, that's not really going to change anything. And so we took our trip, we came back. I wound up hanging out at SVB's receiver company for a little while and then got laid off and moved on from there. But I would say that when all of that happened, sort of like right after COVID, and, I think the wave of layoffs had started, but it really had not kind of in the way that it feels like right now we are in kind of peak layoff space. And so for me, it was maybe in this eye opener and sort of this precursor of like, okay, what does it look like for a field, an industry like banking that typically is almost like borderline boring in terms of the speed and the stability. And that's something that appealed to me, honestly. And then all of a sudden it was, okay, maybe this isn't as predictable as I thought it was going to be. And how do I adapt my, sort of career mindset based on that?
Wow. I'm curious, you were there a little while longer after. One of the key challenges out there, when I talk to people who are hiring, when I talk to peers of mine, and when I look at sort of, folks I've worked with over the years, one of the things that feels like it's almost more relevant than ever is resilience, the ability to, in a tough environment, sort of keep showing up, keep moving forward, keeping your spirits up, for lack of a better phrase. That was like a very difficult environment, I'm sure, to go from everything is fine on Monday to the following Monday, the company's in receivership, to, at the receiver company. When you think about yourself, when you think about the people you saw around you, what were the things that the people who were able to sort of maintain their composure, and if you will, and like be able to sort of still do well in that environment when things are tough? Anything jump to mind about sort of the characteristics you'd highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. A quick sort of story and comparison point is I could call it like almost like a tale of two managers. And so I had, my SVB experience and the manager I was working for at that time. And then just like a year or two earlier, I had the COVID experience. And so I was still at Bank of America and I had a manager there. And what I will say is that those two managers reacted very differently to this sort of sudden emergency situation. And in one case, one of my managers had an approach that was people first, right? I'm going to get right in front of my people. I'm going to make sure that even though there's not a lot we can do in this moment, I'm going to make sure that all my people, Stephen included, right, feel supported, feel like at least they have a voice. There's someone that they can go to, things like that. And then I had a different manager who kind of disappeared, kind of took their own struggles with what was going on and stepped away from the team and really wasn't there as a resource. And in that case, as a team, we had to try and figure out kind of our own approach. And so one of the real big takeaways I had was just in terms of leadership and this idea of attaching yourself to leaders who invest in you as a person and who will be there when, things hit the fan, as it were. And I think that's something that I look back on my career and I think about the times that I've made the most strides. It's really when I've been working with a leader who is invested not only in the success of the team, but in me as a person. I've had leaders who were there when my wife and I had our kids and, we had just challenging situations with, nothing terrible, very fortunate, but just the challenges of, having kids and all that goes into that. And, I've had leaders who are there when things don't go well, when you give a presentation, it doesn't go well, or, you work on a project and something happens, or you get pushback from a stakeholder and you need your leader to come in and sort of be a voice on top of that. And so I would say for me, going through some of those experiences, it really highlighted who you work with and how they view you, whether as a person or as more of a cog. That really dictates a lot of both how you feel, but also your career trajectory and where you're able to grow and develop.
When you think back to those two leaders, because there's incredible merit to the idea of finding really good people who are one step or two steps above you,
yes,
and sort of trying to work with them, because they'll likely progress. That'll open opportunities for you. They'll help you, the whole nine yards. So the stuff you're describing. If you were to look back in time, say a year before, or 6 months or a year before COVID, before Silicon Valley Bank went in receivership, would you have been able to tell me that's, if we were talking like 6 months before, that's probably how they're going to behave?
Yeah.
Or were there any warning signs?
Yeah, I think there were. So it's a great question, because everything, in hindsight, you can kind of look back and go, oh, well, of course that leader responded this way because of XYZ, right? I think one of the skill sets that most folks develop through their career is that instinct for, what kind of leader am I working for? And I think a lot of us kind of know. We know, like, oh, is this leader going to be the person who's going to be there when I'm struggling? Is this the kind of leader I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I really just need to talk through this, difficult situation, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. And then there's those other leaders where it's like, okay, like when things are going well, great, they're going to be supportive. And when things aren't well, you don't know, or you know what it's going to be like, and it's not going to be amazing. And so, I mean, some of the signs that I would look for, like if I'm going to pivot from what I'm doing now back into the workplace, right? I'm going to look for a leader who asks about me, not just as a professional, but as a person. I'm going to look for somebody who recognizes that there are going to be lots of good days, but that there are always going to be days where you are running up against something. Maybe you're not able to bring your 100% to the table. Maybe you bring your 100% and you're just running into corporate barriers. I've worked at a lot of large companies, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Ashley, where you're navigating these kind of matrix environments. Everybody's got their own agendas and incentives and all of that. And then all of a sudden you just run into something where you're like, oh, okay, I'm on the receiving end of, a tirade or somebody like pushing back on something that, maybe has something to do with me, but often doesn't. What's my leader what's their response going to be? Is it like, oh, you have to figure this out? Or are they going to come in and like, hey, let's figure this out together? And you can usually tell. I mean, even in interviews, I talk to a lot of folks where I'm like, ask hard questions in interviews, because that's the leader you're going to work for when things get really rough. So some of the questions I ask is, tell me about a time when you had an employee who was struggling with the project. What did you do as a leader? And that's the type of question where if they kind of go, well, we just kind of figured it out, then I kind of push a little bit. I'm like, oh, well, tell me how. Like, let me understand your process. But if they tell me, okay, here's what I did. I set up weekly get-togethers. Every time we got together, we reviewed progress together. I introduced them to several other folks who could help them think through the situation. I helped them connect with a mentor to help them break down the dynamic and really understand how to navigate the organization. Like, those are all signs to me, green flags, right? This is a leader who gets it and somebody who's going to help me as someone who's navigating this, complex organization.
That's a great question, actually. The only thing I wonder about with that one is, are you introducing the concept of I might be someone who struggles, or is the reality that everyone struggles at some point? So, it doesn't make you any different than anybody else.
To me, and this is the Stephen approach, like, I never want to interview for a job and get the job if I'm not being myself. If I'm not being a transparent version of myself. And so I don't really want to work at a company where the expectation is that you are never going to struggle with anything. Because in my experience, that's not real. It only looks like that on the surface because there's a bunch of stuff going on in the background. Either employees are too scared to bring forward challenges. Maybe the company doesn't have an environment or a culture where it's safe to talk about things. There's a total lack of psychological safety. Maybe there's an environment where it's just like this pure, brutal up and out culture. None of those are things that work well with me as an employee. And so if I'm talking to somebody and I'm asking a question about real life challenges, things I've experienced over, my entire career, and their response is like, that's not what we do here, then it's probably not the right fit for me. I think this is really hard to sort of conceptualize especially when you're newer in your career. It's like, oh, I want to work for like big flashy company, or I want to get this cool job, or, something along those lines. But then the question is like, is that really is that the environment that you want to be in every single day for the next X number of years? For me, I'd rather go work for a company that maybe isn't as flashy of a name on a resume, but I enjoy what I do. I like the people I work with. I'm in a culture where I can grow and thrive. Long term, I think that's better for my career than going and working for some big brand name that is a really toxic culture or just doesn't fit me well.
So, Stephen, let's go to a slightly different topic, but related to what you're doing. What are the key benefits someone would get if they really dove into the work you're doing now, read a lot of your stuff, talked to you? What are the key benefits, transformation almost you would think of that they would get from that?
Yeah. So for folks who haven't run across any of my content online, mostly on LinkedIn,
which you should definitely check out, by the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, so LinkedIn started for me as an opportunity to just kind of flesh out some of the things that I'd been thinking through for my career. And really the core concept that I landed on was what I call develop daily. And it is this idea that I would argue the best thing you could ever do for your career is to set aside an amount of time every single day to stretch and to grow and to try new things. And so what I typically recommend is something in the range of 15 minutes. And I recommend it be a sort of locked in, scheduled habit. And so for me, that means on my calendar every single day is a window of time where I am dedicated to some version of pushing myself. And the reason why I am such a strong advocate for this idea of continuous development is I think that we are entering a workforce. We've already entered it, to be honest. We are entering a workforce that moves so fast that if you rely on, say, your undergraduate degree, or you rely on the training that you're getting in a corporate environment, or you even rely on the handful of business books that you might be able to read every year, that's not going to be enough for you to keep pace. And so one of the stats that I cite all the time is LinkedIn put out a sort of future of skills report. I think it was last year. And they had this big, bold headline stat that said something to the effect of, since 2015, every single year, the top job skills have turned over 24%. Think about that. That's like a quarter of top job skills every single year changing. And why are they changing? Because the market's changing, right? So skills that used to be really valuable, really in demand. I mean, we've seen the sudden surge in AI, right? Being a Python programmer a couple of years ago was like a peak skill. Now, it's still a good skill, don't get me wrong, but AI is really begging the question of is that now a peak skill? Is that something that you can command a serious salary? Is that something you can build your career around? And then you project into the future a couple of years, what's that going to look like? Are you going to be just a Python engineer? Are you going to be a Python engineer who knows AI really well? Or are you going to be a really good AI engineer who happens to do some Python on the side? We're still figuring that out. And so when you have that steady growth, 15 minutes a day, that's really all it takes. And you are able to navigate whatever comes because you've got this habit, right? So my personal example, ChatGPT drops in, I think it was 2022, right? And right at the end of 2022, ChatGPT comes along and completely changes how we're thinking about AI, right? Because prior to that, AI had been something that, maybe giant companies are investing in, predictive modeling and things like that, right? But for the everyday person, for solo entrepreneurs, for folks who are just looking for ways to boost their productivity or grow their career, right? It really wasn't something that was accessible. It was more something you would just kind of hear about and go, okay, well, that's coming at some point, right? And then with ChatGPT, it became something that was, I can literally use a free version of this whenever I want. And it has tons of capabilities. And so for me, all of a sudden, it was sort of this light bulb moment. I need to stay up on this skill set, or I'm going to worry about being left behind. And so I pivoted a lot of my development time to something as simple as jumping into ChatGPT and tinkering with it. Fast forward to today, we're now, 2.5 years since the launch of ChatGPT. I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours going over different things within ChatGPT. Now it is a tool that I use instinctively, almost without thinking. And I can say that it has boosted my productivity. It's helped me with my development goals. Helps me with my personal life. It helps me keep track of things. I build like a little ChatGPT to help me, track my macros because I'm trying to be healthier and things like that. It gives me, recipe recommendations or hey, eat this because it's healthy, that kind of stuff. It is a kind of skill that not only has professional applications, but personal applications. And I would not be where I am with it without a steady development, growth mindset kind of thing and habit. So anyway, that's sort of my long-winded answer of why should you invest in development? Why should you hang out with me on LinkedIn where I just talk about, how I'm investing in development and how you can too? Because we are moving really fast. If you want your career to have longevity, it's not enough to rely on something that you could rely on 50 years ago, which was I'm going to go get a degree. I'm going to go into the field. I'll keep up with the field by simply just working in it, talking to people, maybe getting a little training here or there, and I'll be able to run my whole career that way, maybe even, move up the ladder, et cetera. Like, I really just don't think it's going to be that way anymore. When I think about my kids who are very young, 4 and 5 years old, entering the workforce, I'm like, no, that's not going to be the case at all. Like, they are going to, maybe do college. Like, we'll see what that looks like, what higher education looks like when they get to that stage. But even if they do, it's going to be immediately pivoting out of college and having to have this continuous growth development sort of habit, this muscle. Otherwise, I think they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So that's my worldview. That's my sort of career view. And the more I talk to folks about their career journeys, the more I sort of track the market, read industry reports, it just reaffirms what I believe, which is, we have entered into this brand new market, and this new market rewards folks who are investing in their development.
That's really interesting. In fact, it sort of prompts me to think and ask a little more about AI, and maybe we'll start broadly. So obviously we're a long way since December or November 22. I can't remember which one it was, but the technology is obviously advanced with multiple LLMs, and it seems like there's new applications seemingly almost daily. So students operate in different domains, right? And people early in their career, but let's sort of just we think about that way. You've got students who are doing academic, they're doing their job search prep, they're preparing for success in their careers. People in their careers are sort of, they have their own stuff they're doing with respect directly to their job. Let me just start at a high level. And, how can people use AI, LLMs, chatbots, whatever, maybe agents soon to maximal effect? Is the idea to, get more done in less time, or to, get what you're doing done better? And, I have a couple more questions about Adaptability, but let's go here next, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. AI has become one of my favorite topics. I'll first caveat by saying I describe myself as kind of an AI interested, but not an AI expert. I don't have the technological background. You ask me, how do these LLMs work? I could probably describe it to you at a very high level, but I can't, dig into the technical details. And yet, I personally have still been able to extract a ton of value out of AI. And so one of the things that I like to start with when I talk to folks about AI is you don't have to be a technology expert. In fact, you really don't have to know much more than how to open up something like ChatGPT and start typing into the chat box.
Which is almost the whole point of it, really, right?
It's a sandbox environment, right? It is literally designed to be such a flexible tool. Now, in some ways, that can be intimidating. And so I talk to folks who almost view it as a writer. My analogy is like the blank page, right? So for anybody who's ever written a college essay or something like that, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm staring at a blank page. I have to turn this into 5 pages on, whatever, the Iliad and the Odyssey or something. Like, where do I even begin, right? And so it's a little bit that way with ChatGPT, where it's like, oh my goodness, I have this amazing tool and it has so much capability, but where do I even get started? And so sort of my advice when it comes to ChatGPT is almost the same as my writing advice as somebody who, last year wrote like over 1 million words for our clients. Like, you often just get started, right? It is often just like, oh, I'm going to tinker a little bit. I'm going to, so when I write, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write like 10 options or 10 variations of my opening line. And that's just going to get the juices flowing. And then I can go from there, right? So similarly, when I get into ChatGPT, right, I'm going to start by thinking about something like a use case. What am I trying to accomplish? What does this look like? And then from there, I'm going to start tinkering. Over time, as Stephen, like I said, I've invested hundreds of hours in ChatGPT at this point and other LLM models and things like that. Now I'm at a point where, writing complicated prompts, et cetera, really extracting as much value as possible has become a little bit second nature. But even just getting started, when I first started jumping in the tool, it was like, okay, let me just see what I can do with this. Like, I'm just going to ask it for stuff and see if it's valuable. And if I don't like what it's giving me, I'm going to tell it that. I'm going to say like, hey, this isn't good enough. Give me something better, or hey, I, like what you did over here, but I don't like what you do over there. It's this kind of continuous experimental mindset, almost like a scientist, like almost bring in that scientific method of, okay, I'm going to try this thing, see if it works, adapt, and keep going, right? How do we use that within our careers? How do we use that with a new technology like AI? It's the same concept, right? I'm going to jump into ChatGPT. I'm going to start typing something, and then I'm going to go from there. And I'll tell you, even as somebody who like now has done this for a couple of years, just for my own career, I'm still running into new things all the time. So just to give you a quick example, for years, I've been trying to figure out a more effective way to extract the information that is so prevalent and available on platforms like YouTube, right? So on YouTube, there are really smart folks who are sharing tons of amazing information. But to go through YouTube with its billions of videos and try and figure out like, who should I be listening to? And even if I find somebody who I should be listening to, how do I actually extract value from what they have without just spending hours and hours watching videos, right? That's a tough nut to crack. And so I've been trying to figure this out, and I had kind of created a little bit of a version for myself using ChatGPT. And so what I did is I found this little tool that would scrape a YouTube video and turn it into a transcript. Very simple. It'll take the audio and turn it into text. Then I wrote a prompt that said, ChatGPT, I want you to take this transcript. And then I taught it how to write the kind of summary that I wanted, right? So instead of just saying like, hey, give me a summary, I said, this is exactly what I want you to do in order to take a YouTube transcript, in some cases, even 3-hour long YouTube transcript, and turn it into something that I can absorb in a matter of minutes, right? I'm getting the high level, right? I'm not going to get every single detail, but I'm going to get the high level, and then I can go from there, right? And so that was something that I did, and I had been doing that for a while. I actually posted about this on LinkedIn the other day, and funny enough, somebody in my network, somebody that I actually know pretty well, jumped in and was like, "Hey, have you considered doing X?" And their version was better than my version. So what they recommended was, instead of using ChatGPT, go use Google's, I believe it's called Notebook LM. And so it is a tool that, instead of sort of combing through everything that's out there, it actually pulls in specific sources and just limits to those sources. And it is very good at extracting YouTube content. And so what I did then is I went and found a YouTube channel that I really have been wanting to dig into, but hadn't had the time. It's a channel on writing where this guy interviews like really good writers talking about their writing process. And I took the top 50 videos from that. All I had to do was add the link and do a little bit of formatting in the Google Notebook LM. And then I basically had a searchable conversational version of that YouTube channel. And then I could say, what are the top 5 things that writing experts have mentioned on this channel in terms of their tips? Let's dig into some of these more. What are some of the use cases? What are some examples? What are the frameworks that they like to use on a regular basis? And instead of having to spend literally like 100 hours or more going through those videos, I did in like 30 minutes and got some really meaty takeaways that I could immediately begin to apply. So that's just a small example of how I think tools like ChatGPT, Google Notebook LM, like they're really changing the game in terms of our ability to absorb information in a very effective manner if we know what we're doing and if we're pursuing that information.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
That seems like a really interesting approach, which I'm going to have to think about. Interesting thing, well, a bunch of interesting things, but one of them that jumps out at me is that it just takes time to, one, become familiar with the effective use of these tools, and 2, figure out, how do I apply these tools? You're exactly right. I need to spend 15 minutes every day doing this. How do I decide what to spend that time on?
Yeah. I mean, that is the universal question, right? We now live in an era where you almost have more access to information than you even know what to do with, right? So am I going to spend my time trying to refine this skill versus that skill? Am I going to spend my time trying to learn about this or learn about that, right? And ultimately, that is the hardest question. For me, it is a daily prioritization exercise. Right. So thinking about, what am I trying to accomplish? What are my career goals? And what are the either skills or knowledge base or connections that are going to align with that? And so one of the topics that I talk about pretty regularly on LinkedIn is what I call random acts of learning. And so when I look at professionals and the way that they develop themselves, I typically see 2 buckets. I either see folks who really aren't investing in their development very much, or I see folks who are investing in their development, but it's very unstructured or undirected. It's a bit like getting in your car, but not knowing where you're going, right? A little different than getting in your car, pulling up your GPS, going, okay, I'm going to go to the local Starbucks, and then boom, I'm just going there, right? But if you get in your car and you start driving around, sure, you might like find some interesting stuff, but it's really not the most efficient way. And often you're just going to wind up kind of wasting gas and wasting your time, et cetera. And I see a lot of professionals do that same thing when it comes to their development. They will, let's say, be on Instagram or LinkedIn or something like that, and they'll be like, oh, top 10 business books. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, I need to read those business books, right? Well, do you? Like, what are your career goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And do these books align with what you're trying to accomplish? For me, where I'm at right now, the things that I'm trying to accomplish are growing our agency, delivering amazing content for our clients, and investing in skills that I think are going to be long-term, like AI. And so if I'm running across even really interesting or really cool resources, I've actually started to bucket those a little bit differently. I almost treat those more as like entertainment. Like, oh, okay, In the same way I would pull up a Netflix, documentary or something, like I'm going to watch Chef's Table or something, like I'm going to read about, something that's like interesting, but not directly aligned with my career goals, right? So for me, that might be, like I'm really interested in like, SaaS technology or something like that, right? But is that really going to align with the 3 career goals I just outlined of, staying on top of AI and growing my agency and writing great content? Probably not. So if I'm investing in learning about SaaS a little bit more, I'm going to treat that like entertainment, not as career development. So it's breaking these ideas of growth into different buckets. In order to do this, you have to have a clarity of your why. Why am I here? What am I trying to accomplish? And I think a lot of folks skip that step, right? They skip that step of what do I want out of my career? Ultimately, how do I want to craft my career? They're almost a little too reactionary to what's going on in the market around them or, other folks that they see progressing career-wise without asking the question of like, is that right for me? So for example, there were multiple career paths that I thought I wanted to do when I was younger. For example, I went to law school. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I started spending time with lawyers. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that 24/7. I don't want to work that much. I don't want to be doing, that kind of work all the time. Similarly with things like iBanking or consulting, I was like, oh, those seem really cool careers. And then you talk to people and you're like, no, that doesn't align with me, who I am, what I want out of my career, things like that. And so instead, over time, what I've really tried to do is take the opposite approach. Instead of starting with like, ooh, that's interesting, or ooh, I met somebody who's doing that, it's like, who am I? What defines Stephen? What do I care about? For example, when my wife and I had kids, that changed everything about how I think about my career. I no longer want to work large amounts of hours with limited flexibility. And so even something like starting our own agency was in many ways a reaction to we wanted more time with our kids. We wanted the ability to be able to go to a random school event at a 2 p.m. on a Thursday and not have to ask for permission from anybody, right? And so that's the kind of thing where my ambitions and my goals in life directly influenced my career decisions. And then I aligned my development to fit into that. And so especially for young people, thinking a lot about who am I? What are the natural skills, the natural inclinations that I bring to the table, and where do I want my career to go? If you're early in your career and you just want to go, right? Go into consulting, go into iBanking. Like that's great. If you're Stephen and you have a 4 and a 5-year-old, that's not going to be the fit, right? I want flexibility. Like I want to be able to hang out with my kids, and so those aren't career paths that are really going to fit for me. And so anyway, I don't know if this makes sense, but like really starting with your core why, and then everything kind of extends from that. So from a development perspective, it's okay, my core why is spending more time with my kids. How I'm doing that career wise is running this agency. What are the skills that I need to be A+ on in order to run this agency?
So let's combine the discussion around develop daily in AI, developing in AI and getting better at that. It's not, my old Unix prof used to say, Unix is super user-friendly, but it chooses who it's user-friendly to. And you kind of got to get to know it. And so I think AI is a little bit like that, where you have to develop the ability to effectively prompt, effectively even know what problem you're trying to solve, which you alluded to. Yeah. Do you recommend people, go take a course, use something on a project-based fashion where you're like, I'm trying to solve this problem, I'll use AI, I will develop my skills that way? How do you think about that?
I think that's a great question. And I think it is probably one of the top reasons why more folks haven't invested in AI is they sort of look at it and they go, okay, it's important. I'm reading all these reports, but what does it actually look like for me? All right. What I'll share with you is what I typically recommend, which is if you really dig into the literature on how we learn things, right? There are some models that very quickly kind of rise to the front. And one of them is this idea that about 80-ish% of learning comes from direct application, right? I think when a lot of us think about learning, we actually think about like, oh, I'm sitting in a university classroom and I'm listening to a professor lecture on, whatever topic and I'm learning, right? That's actually not how our brains are wired. Like our brains are not very good, honestly, at just absorbing large blocks of information. Our brains are good at taking something and putting it to use. And so what I often recommend is what I call sort of like the quick start, which is how do I get just enough of a foundational knowledge in order to be able to do something, right? So if I skip that foundational knowledge step and just go straight to wild experimentation, then I'm often just going to waste a lot of my time and maybe not really get anywhere fast. So what is sort of like that minimal amount of foundation that I need? in order to get up and running. For most folks, it's going to be like 1 to 3 hours of a little bit of formal learning. And the nice thing about AI is there's a ton of great resources out there. Like you can jump in. LinkedIn Learning has a bunch of like quick starter courses. Almost all of the major platforms for AI have their own courses. Google has it. OpenAI has what they call OpenAI Academy. I was just in there the other day, and they have targeted courses based off of who you are. So they've got like a targeted course, I believe, for students. It just says like OpenAI for students. They've got another one that's for seniors. It's like OpenAI for seniors. It's like, and they're short, right? Maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, right? And so they're going to give you the quick hits, enough foundational knowledge, and then take that and apply it to something in your life. Now, obviously, that's going to look different for everyone. And so the big question is like, what are you working on right now? And what do you think AI can help you with? Most of us would probably have a pretty good instinct. Like for me, when I started thinking seriously about AI and I was in a learning and development capacity, one of the first things I thought of was like, okay, like I'm a pretty good writer. I'm a pretty good creator when it comes to L&D content. I'm actually not the world's best brainstormer. I'm not the best at like coming up with ideas from scratch. I actually tend to surround myself with folks like my wife who are very like idea driven. She's great. Like if I'm ever like, hey, I am not really sure what to do here, she's like, here's like 10 ideas and they're all amazing, And so, I can definitely go to my wife still, but if I am like needing help with that brainstorming, it's like, I'm going to go to AI, right? And so I'm going to go in there and be like, what are 10 possible scenarios that I could use to illustrate this learning concept in my L&D work, right? Now that I'm a content creator and a writer, I do the same thing, right? So if I'm working with a finance company and we start with this nugget of an idea, which is, we want to write an article on how you can, better improve your finances as a small business owner or something like that, right? Instead of trying to just rack my brain of all the things that I could think of from a small business perspective, I'm going to jump into AI. And so that's an example of something where instead of me sitting around with a pen and paper trying to just jot down a bunch of things, I'm using AI to accelerate that process, especially in an area where I'm not particularly the best at, so that then I can fast forward to the part that I am pretty good at it, which is once I get that sort of like pretty good outline, like I can write it up in minutes. That's my skill set. So what I would encourage folks to think about is, what is that area where you tend to get stuck on whatever it is you're working on? So for example, if you're a project manager, right? I've worked project management roles before, right? Some project managers are really excellent in terms of like the relationship side of things. But then when it comes to like documenting everything, they're like, oh, I don't want to sit here and create another project charter, right? Well, jump into AI and be like, hey, can you give me a template for a project charter, right? Then of course, you're going to apply your own institutional knowledge. You're not going to just take what it gave you and run with it. I think that's a huge mistake, but it is giving you a starter format and you can ask it questions. Okay, you just gave me this template for a project charter. Why did you structure it this way? What's so important about these different categories? Explain that to me. And then you can think about, do I need that? Do I not need that? How am I going to apply that? And then that's going to accelerate you to getting that project charter done quicker. So then you can move on to the things that you really are good at and enjoy doing, et cetera. So those use cases where it's like, where am I getting stuck? That's probably a good time to start reaching for AI.
With respect to AI, again, our audience is students trying to looking to get their dream job, people looking to accelerate their careers. I suppose everything around that, but maybe if we just focus on those two things, anything we haven't talked about that from an AI use case perspective, skill development perspective, anything like that leaps to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorites, and I wish I had this when I was earlier in my career and applying for jobs, right? And so I'm sure this has popped up on your podcast before, but when you are job searching, please, please, please research the companies that you're applying for and research the people that you're applying for, right? That is going to make you stand out in so many ways in the application process. If I roll into Bank of America where I worked and I start talking about things that are not Bank of America specific, maybe lines of business that they don't have or they don't really want to run, then I'm just going to, or if I roll in, I've literally been in interview scenarios where I don't think I've ever done this, but I've heard other folks do it, where they're just like, the interviewer will ask like, do you know what we do at this company? And some folks just like blank page. Like that is one of the quickest ways to just immediately get kicked out of that room. It's like, so I would encourage folks, like AI is great at summarizing information like that. If I'm going to go and apply for a job at Google, right? Okay, everybody knows Google, but like what's Google really focused on right now, today that matters to them? I'm going to jump into a tool like maybe ChatGPT, but actually I would jump into something like Perplexity, which is much better at synthesizing very current information. And I'm going to go, what are Google's top 5 strategic priorities as of April 2025? And then I'm going to see what it talks about. And then I can dive deeper. One of the beautiful things about Perplexity is it literally includes links, with every single bit of information that it gives you. So it might say number one priority is Gemini AI for Google, right? That is one of their top priority. Okay, then I'm going to click and I'm going to read a couple links on that. Then when I roll into an interview, it doesn't matter if that interview is for a project manager, an engineer, somebody on the marketing team, right? I'm going to roll in there and I'll be like, I know you all are really thinking about Gemini right now. This is what I'm seeing. This is kind of how I would apply that to this role. You are going to stand out so much versus somebody who comes in and is just talking about themselves. Ultimately, what companies care about and it is what can you bring to the table for them. And when you come in knowing about the company and their current challenges as an outsider, what that signals is you did your homework and you're ready to hit the ground running, delivering value.
I love it. That's great. And also really interesting nuance to that. So that was really good. Let's shift gears to starting your career out strong. It's now, you're 22 years old. What do you tell Stephen? Maybe pick 3 things that you would tell Stephen that are broadly applicable that you might not have known, that other people might not commonly know, but are quite impactful and can make a real difference.
Yeah, I love this question. As 22-year-old Stephen, I was sort of stumbling around in the dark, trying to figure things out. And now as, 35-year-old Stephen, I feel like I have a little bit more wisdom. So hopefully this is helpful for folks who are still in that stage.
It's at least dawn outside. You can see a little bit.
That's right. Yeah. I've got my little, glow light or whatever, one step ahead. Yeah. So the first thing I would say is this idea of moving past the fear of rejection. It is one of the things that I see with so many young people. I haven't talked about this yet, but I'm a professor on the side. I teach at local community colleges. I've done that for years and years. And one of the things I see so often is students who are intimidated by the idea of putting their foot forward, whether that is in a classroom, raising their hand, volunteering for a project, presenting, things like that. But in the workplace, I see it as well. Younger folks who, understandably, you're earlier in your career, you're still trying to get a lay of the land. You don't want to come across as, arrogant or a know-it-all or anything like that, but you might miss out on those opportunities to really put yourself forward and really unlock some valuable ideas for yourself. And so as somebody who is an introvert, as somebody who grew up very terrified of the idea of rejection, falling on my face, looking like a fool, whatever, just last year read this really good book on entrepreneurship. And I'll recommend it for folks. It's got a little bit of a kind of clickbaity title. It's called $1 Million Weekend, but it's by an entrepreneur named Noah Kagan. And one of his top things in there is he says when he's starting a new business, he sets what he calls a rejection goal. He literally defines the number of times he wants to be rejected trying to grow his business. Now, in his case, he's reaching out to people and being like, hey, do you want to buy XYZ? Right? And he knows that rejection is part of that. Like, I'm going to reach out to 100 people. 50 of them aren't going to reply. 5 of them might send me a nastygram. And then I might, close a couple deals. And so his mindset is, instead of trying to focus on how many deals am I going to close, he flips it around. He says, how many times am I going to get rejected on my way to 5 deals? Right? And he sets that goal. And I just found that so empowering in terms of a lot of areas of life, right? So if I am going to be a 22-year-old and maybe I'm applying for jobs, right? How many times am I going to get rejected? Probably quite a few. Ashley, I'm sure you've been rejected. I've been rejected. It's part of the game, right? But it stings, right? Getting that email that just says, sorry, you're not the right, you're the right fit for this one. It stings unless you flip it around and go, okay, that's another one on the rejection goal list, right? It is literally just kind of this mindset shift. So highly recommend reframing how we think about rejection as a young person. And it doesn't mean like just sort of taking a unpredictable approach to your career and just going out there and doing whatever. But it is when you know that you're pursuing something and you know that there's a risk of rejection, being okay with that. And in fact, even leaning into it a little bit and saying like, okay, I'm going to go apply for this job. Or one of my favorites is raising your hand at work for a new project. So there are going to be those times where your leader comes to the table. Maybe they're on a team call and they're saying, yada, 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 we've got this new project. Anybody interested? And I can tell you, I raise my hand all of the time. I am the first person. Do I get picked every time? No. And that's fine. I get rejected, right? But I can tell you that on at least 2 or 3 occasions, I have unlocked brand new paths in my career by simply just going, yep, I'll be the person who do that. Do I know how to do it? Maybe not. But you know what? I'm going to raise my hand. I'll figure it out and we'll go from there. And so that is, for me, that has been transformative from 22-year-old Stephen, who was very scared to do anything like that, to 35-year-old Stephen, who's now like, okay, I'm just going to like cold message this person and see if I can, get on their podcast or try to sell them on my business or whatever,
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting you say that because, so I've read the book as well. I'm in the process of reading the book and it's a great read. Yeah. And this concept of his is like so valuable. And my daughter and I were driving to pick up a pizza and we just started talking about this. And I said, I was explaining to her, and she said, so are you going to do that when we go for the pizza? I was like, yeah, totally. And current Ashley, like I'm pretty comfortable, outgoing. You don't particularly fear rejection. No one likes it, but it doesn't, it's not something that I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this. And even I was like, okay. So of course now I have to do it, right?
Right.
And so we get into the pizza place, and she's got this little smile on her face as she's watching me. And, I got those little butterflies in my stomach, and I go to the pizza place and I say, can we get a discount on the pizza? And meanwhile, the guy's like, how much do you want? And I was like, in my brain, I'm like, I don't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I was expecting you to say no. Right. So I was like, 10%? He's like, sure, pay cash and we'll give you 10% off. I was like, yes, let's do it. Meanwhile, my daughter's looking at me like, is this for real? Like, did you set this up? And so like I fully expected the person to be like, no, dude, what are you talking about? And he's like, how much you want? And so it's amazing, like just not being afraid to, or taking, even when you are afraid, taking that leap. I mean, this was like 10% off the pizza, but the amount of good things that can happen and come from that are remarkable.
I love that. Actually, I love that for you. I love that for your daughter as like such a early lesson for her in terms of, ask for what you want. Like sometimes as simple as being like, hey, can I get 10% off of this? Or like just to kind of bring in maybe a career example. So I have done a lot of public speaking as a teacher, spoken at conferences and things like that. And last year I was asked to MC a marketing conference here in Arizona. And my gut instinct was kind of your gut instinct when it was like, do I ask for the, discount on the pizza? It was like, I've never MC'd anything before in my life. I'm really nervous, but I tried to use some of that, like, okay, I'm going to put myself out there. And I did it. I said, yeah, sure, I'm going to do it. I had the best experience. It was so much fun. I met so many cool people. I added something to, my skill set. And it came because of putting myself, being like, okay, yeah, well, MC, like, let's do it. Who knows? Maybe I fall flat on my face, but I'm going to give it a go. So I'm a huge proponent of putting yourself out there, asking the question, and going from there and seeing what happens. I think that's so cool.
I have a rule. It's like never say no on someone else's behalf. Let them say no to you, but don't say no in anticipation of them saying no. Don't not ask in anticipation of them saying no.
I love that. I love that.
So I cut you off after one, Stephen. Why don't you jump in and tell us maybe some more things you would tell 22-year-old Stephen?
Yeah. So there's this other one that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of 22-year-old Stephen. And let me see if I can sort of package it together in a simple way. I have come to believe that almost everything that we do professionally is in fact just a skill that can be learned, rather than what I think I grew up thinking, and what I think a lot of folks still think, which is I either have a natural inclination towards something or I don't. And so I'm sort of trying to separate those two, right? So there are folks that you will run across who are so loquacious and outgoing and well-spoken. And you just go, wow, they must have like literally come out of the womb able to talk in front of thousands of people, like Tony Robbins, whoever you want to fill in the blank, right? Somebody who is just so well-spoken in that regard, right? And it's very easy to look at that and go, that person has something I don't. Right. It's very easy to look at, your favorite sports star, the LeBron James of the world, right? And go like, oh, they have something I don't. Now, in the sports environment, maybe you just happen to be LeBron James and you're like 6'7" and 250 and you can, dunk from anywhere. But in many regards, especially in a professional environment, like we have the capability. We often hold ourselves back because we think that it is something that has to be internal, when in fact it is something that we can develop. So the example that I love to give here is I am an introvert through and through. I get my energy from quiet spaces, sitting and reading books, things like that. But I have been able to give presentations to rooms as large as 100 or more people and get very nice feedback from folks, not because that was something that was inherent, but because it was something I pursued. And so I remember a very critical like flex point in my grad school days where I was in a class. It was a kind of career growth class. And the teacher said, does anybody want to get up and sort of give their like elevator pitch? And the butterflies were so bad in my stomach. And I was like, I'm not a good public speaker. I'm so intimidated by this. And for whatever reason, I was just like, raise my hand thing, right? I'm just going to go up there and I'm going to give my little elevator pitch, and it's probably going to be terrible, and that's okay because it's a room of peers and, who cares? And so I get up there and I give my little pitch, and then I go and sit down, and the teacher comes up to me afterwards and was just like, that was great. Thank you for doing that. And so then I just started putting myself out there more, right? I, started teaching. Then I'm in front of students talking, for hours. I started, volunteering to facilitate trainings at work at Bank of America. In some cases, that meant being in front of 5 or 10 people. Some cases that meant being in front of hundreds and having to talk. I'm terrified. What's going on? Right. And then, like I mentioned, sort of fast forward, I'm presenting at conferences. And then this past year, I'm emceeing a conference, right? That is not something that was inherent, natural. I wasn't born with that skill set. It's something that I chose to pursue, and I was able to develop it. And so there is this really interesting vein of research that is just starting to emerge. And I hope folks are able to read it. Probably one of the best examples is Adam Grant has a book called Hidden Potential that I highly, highly recommend. But he talks about this combination of growth mindset, right? I'm going to put myself out there, and recognizing that most things in your career are a skill that you can develop. When you combine those two things together, when you combine this attitude of, I'm going to go pursue something and I believe that I can develop that skill, that it's not inherent, it is something that can be learned, then all of a sudden you open so many doors for your career. You're not limited by, am I naturally a good public speaker or not? You can go, I want to be a good public speaker. I'm going to go pursue that, and I'm going to go learn that skill. Am I naturally good at math? I hear this all the time. I can't go get a job in XYZ because I'm not good at math, or I'm not good at computer programming, or I'm not good at XYZ. It's actually gotten to the point where now with my kids, I have very nicely barred the words I can't in our house. And instead we've replaced it with, I'm still working on it. And so when my kid goes, I can't tie my shoes, I'm like, you can. We're going to figure it out together. I'm still working on it, right? That's the idea. It is this growth mindset. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to develop it. And so 22-year-old Stephen limited himself with this idea of, okay, I have a couple things that I feel like I'm pretty good at that maybe come naturally to me. And then there are a whole bunch of other things that I'm really terrible at because they don't come naturally. And I can't go that direction in my career because I'm not naturally good at those. Fast forward to 35-year-old Stephen, I can name you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 examples of skills where I was just like, you know what? I may not be naturally good at that, but I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to invest the time. I'm going to use my develop daily approach, and I'm going to get decent, pretty good at it. And then I can use it for my career. So I would highly encourage young folks to think outside of that sort of rigid, fixed, I have X skill set, and think in terms of this much more expansive. I'm going to bring a growth mindset to the table. And if there's something I want to pursue, I'm going to go pursue it.
Wow, that's really interesting. I haven't read that Adam Grant book, but I'll have to check it out. That sounds really interesting.
Highly recommend. Really good.
Stephen, let's jump into some of the things that mistakes that are common that people will make early in their career that they don't have to make. Anything jump out at you with respect to that?
Yeah, I think, I'll share one that's very personal to me, if that's okay. And sure. I also think it's a bit of a market trend that might be helpful for young professionals. I remember when I was, 22-year-old Stephen, as it were, and I had this image, especially going into an industry like banking, where I was like, I need to be professional all the time. I need to have this professional demeanor. I need to talk professionally. When I write, I need to write professionally. And in that context, professional kind of meant a little stuffy, a little removed from who I am as a person, not sharing a lot of personal details, things like that. And whether through just sort of tapping into my own natural kind of relaxed nature, maybe that's what it is. I grew up in the West, it's a pretty relaxed environment out here. And also just, I think some of the shifts in corporate environment, I'm seeing a lot more people lean into their personality, their interests, their hobbies, their natural way of talking, much more relaxed. And so for me, it's actually been this journey of almost unlearning professional speak to come across as the more authentic version of myself, rather than what I think people want to see from a professional, if that makes sense. It's it's like who I am versus who I want to be perceived as. I'd rather just eliminate that bifurcation or that disconnect and just be Stephen all the time. And there's going to be some scenarios where folks don't necessarily, gel with that for whatever reason. That's okay. Those probably aren't the folks that I really want to be working with or working for. Kind of going back to what we had talked a little bit earlier about of interviewing. I've really come kind of full circle on interviews where it's like, if this isn't a fit, it's not a fit. Like, I'm not going to try and make something fit that doesn't. Instead, I'm going to roll in. I'm going to be Stephen. I'm going to talk the way Stephen talks. I'm going to talk about the things that Stephen talks about. I'm going to talk about my kids and my mini schnauzers and, my upcoming vacation to France. And, like, that's who I am. And those are some of the things that I'm interested in. And so if I could go back and, sort of like repackage that or give advice to younger folks, it's like, it's okay to just be yourself. Obviously you don't want to overstep on like very defined boundaries, like just be smart, but you don't have to change who you are, the way you talk, the things that you're interested in. And in fact, like, you should be bringing a lot of that personality to the forefront. Like when I post on LinkedIn, it was kind of the same thing when I first started. Like, I didn't learn that lesson, like it was, corporate wise, like, or just be, like I'm talking with Ashley, like I learned the lesson of, oh, okay, just like relax, be yourself. For whatever reason, when I started posting on LinkedIn, initially, I was very nervous. And so I defaulted to this like more professional tone. I'm only going to talk about these very important professional topics, et cetera. And, now like 2+ years later, I'm like, I'm just going to talk like Stephen. I'm going to write like Stephen. I'm just going to share the things that Stephen cares about. And, people are either going to connect with that or they're not. So for young folks, it's if you start feeling that sense of like, oh, I need to be more professional, maybe. But in my experience, it's actually often much better to just be yourself.
Some of it is going to be situation based, but I do hear what you're saying, particularly because I think there's not only an element of authenticity to it, but there's an element of memorability to it.
Yes.
Like, it's so easy to just blend in and not be noticed or stand out or have anyone sort of associate you mentally with anything if you don't do this. I do, as you were talking, I was like, there's got to be kind of like some balance there.
Yes.
Between sort of like the extent to which you do it and share. I think it's such an important point because, and I do think of it in specifics of memorability. Like, you don't want to be the person who nobody remembers for any particular reason. You don't want to be the person people remember for bad reasons. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I think there's some element of that. And it doesn't have to be sort of like, sharing every element of your life. Some of it is like just like, oh yeah, Ashley is the guy who's really into, he loves Lord of the Rings, or he's really into whatever, and just makes you more, I think, a full person as opposed to a two-dimensional person.
Yes, exactly. One of the analogies that I like to use as a writer is, I do a lot of ghostwriting. So I'm writing on behalf of companies, and I'm going to flex the voice of that writing depending on the company that I'm writing for, right? So if I'm writing for a Fortune 500 bank, right, that's going to be a different voice than if I'm writing for a startup in the SaaS space that is, much more fast moving, much more casual, et cetera, right? I'm going to adjust that voice, but I'm not going to lose the personality in adjusting that voice. Like you're saying, I'm not going to be boring. I'm not going to purposely write boring just because I'm flexing the voice. I'm just going to use a different tone. I'm going to use a different approach. I'm going to think about that target audience, et cetera. But my banking content, my banking writing should be just as interesting as my SaaS writing. It's just going to be in a different voice. And so to your point, I think the caveat that I would give would be, what environment are you in? Do you work for a startup where everybody is just like talking about everything? Or do you, are you in more of kind of like a suit and tie corporate environment? Okay, yeah, maybe flex to that corporate environment, but that doesn't mean you have to exclude what makes you you, right? You can talk about Lord of the Rings in both of those environments. It's just a matter of like when you bring it up and, how you talk about it and all those things. So that I think would be my biggest caveat. I guess maybe the other caveat is just like, be smart, like there are a couple of like major topics that are just going to get you in a lot of hot water for no reason. So just, avoid those altogether. But 95% of the things, you can kind of bring your full self and, add that level of personality, that level of memorability. I think a lot of what we're talking about sort of bleeds into this personal branding side of things. Who are you to the people that you work with? Like, are you just the person who's there just doing stuff? Or are you, Ashley, the person who likes Lord of the Rings and, is an awesome hang and like, all those things? Like, how are you remembered? I think that goes a long way in your career, having a personal brand that is memorable and stands out rather than just being kind of like a cardboard cutout of a corporate worker.
I think too, you hit on like two or three things that struck me there. One is the personal side of the personal brand. Mm-hmm. For it to be useful has to be paired with a professional side of the personal brand. Yes. Being, Stephen is really good at these things. I can count on him when he says he's going to do something, he does it. Like the professional side of the brand and the personal side of the brand. If you have that professional side of it, the personal side, I think, really almost amplifies the professional side. because
Yes.
you have that element of it. You have that the basics of what's great, and then it's like, oh, and I also know this person. They're human.
It is. I mean, there are certain basic human psychological things that tie us together as people, right? And that's true in a work environment just in the same way it is in your local community or in, the circles that you walk in. Like, do you feel trustworthy? Do you feel likable? Do you feel like somebody that can be relied upon? Like those are the same in the workplace environment. So why do we leave big chunks of ourselves out of that when we could be bringing those in? Like, it sounds kind of silly, but I've actually heard pretty senior leaders at even more sort of suit and tie companies saying that one of the primary factors they look for when they interview someone is like, would I want to go on a business trip with this person? Would I want to have to spend hours with this person?
What if I was stuck in the airport with this person?
Yes, exactly. Like, if our flight gets delayed and there's nobody else and it's just the two of us for, 6 hours or whatever, like, what are we going to talk about? Like, what's that going to be like? If I have to work on a project with you and we're, jamming on calls for 2+ hours every day for a month, like, am I going to get so sick of you, or are we just going to have a great time? Like, that matters. You can argue whether it should matter or shouldn't matter or whatever. It does. It matters because we're all humans at the end of the day. And so if you are sort of carving out the personal side of things because you think you need to be more professional, you might be missing out on that opportunity to really present yourself as somebody who is like, yeah, I would want to work with this person on a project because not only are they going to bring awesome skill sets and be super reliable, but also just like a good hang, like they're just somebody that I want to be around.
Let's just shift gears real quick if we can to writing, because that's another area you spend a bunch of time sharing knowledge about. I guess I would say I am broadly of the view that people will really benefit from writing and sharing what they're learning on social media, because that's kind of like the lowest friction way to do it. Can you talk about why, first off, do you agree with that? And I suspect you probably do. Can you talk about why you think that's important, why you think that's relevant, both for students and people in their career?
Yeah. So let me just start by saying, like, 100% huge approval stamp on what you just said. If there were two things that I would say, like, invest in this as a young professional, I've already mentioned the first, which is growth mindset. And the other one I would mention is communication, and writing falls very much into that bucket. And so, yes, I'm a huge advocate of refining that skill set. And one of the easiest ways to do that in the current environment and promote your personal brand at the same time is by putting yourself out there. And I think part of the reason why a lot of folks don't is it's intimidating. And there is sort of this misconception that, like, oh, I have to be the CEO of a 500-person company in order for my thoughts to be valid on social media. And I can tell you that as somebody who's on social media, LinkedIn specifically, the corporate social media, the business social media, I am less interested in, like, are you the CEO of whatever? I'm more interested in, like, what are you talking about? What ideas are you sharing? Like, I'll follow you. It doesn't matter. You could be, 19 years old and talking about, the latest, piece of technology you're working on or something that you're doing career-wise. If you're presenting interesting ideas in an interesting way, and I'm either connecting with you from that lens, or I'm learning from you or something along those lines, you're an instant follow. If you're CEO of some, Fortune 500 company, but you're not posting about things that are connecting with me as a person, it doesn't matter, right? So I would encourage young folks to think about what can I share that other folks might resonate with. Okay. So if I'm early in my career, I'm probably not going to be sharing, like, lessons from the boardroom, right? But what are the things that people can relate to? We all have sort of these universal elements of our careers, right? Oh, I was in this meeting and somebody said something difficult or pushed back on me. Here's how I responded. Like, that is universal. It doesn't matter whether you're the CEO or you're literally lowest on the totem pole, right? And so when I talk to young folks, and I'll even say, like, oh, have you thought about posting on social media? Honestly, one of the very first things I hear is like, what, am I allowed to? Or, like, do I have enough interesting things to say to even post on LinkedIn? And I'm always like, yeah, just talk about what you're doing. Talk about what you're working on. Like, again, think about your personal brand. Like, don't, make sure you're presenting yourself in the right way. But it is a great way to connect with people. Ashley, you and I never would have met if not for LinkedIn. Like, you live in Toronto, I live in Chandler. Like, we don't even necessarily work in the same industry. Like, we never would have met, but I'm really glad we did. And that opened the door for this conversation. And that was all because you post on LinkedIn, I post on LinkedIn, and we found common interest in the things that we were talking about, right? And so I see it as this great connector, this great opportunity to boost your network, to boost your personal brand. And you don't have to be talking about these groundbreaking things. You don't have to be Sam Altman breaking down the latest in OpenAI, right? In order to have valuable thoughts. In fact, I'm actually much more interested in kind of the everyday person who is navigating their career challenges. The people I spend the most time tracking on LinkedIn are folks who just kind of call it like they see it and are sharing valuable tidbits on things that I care about. And so my takeaway for a 22-year-old is start tinkering. Maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's once every couple of days. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to, write an essay. You don't have to write this and that. Like, share something you're learning. Write it in your natural voice. And in some cases, like, we have technology now that makes this so easy. There are so many good like audio to text apps that you can download on your phone you can just talk into it like you and I are having a conversation. And in fact, I'll share this with you because I do a ton of ghostwriting on LinkedIn for some of our clients. So I am not only writing for my own personal brand, but I'm also writing for, in a lot of cases, like CEOs and stuff like that. And in order to do that effectively, I just track as much as I can going on LinkedIn. There is this huge trend away from sort of formal, showy, highfalutin teaching, and this very big pushback against that to much more authentic, story-driven, personal experience-driven content. That is what is really connecting with people. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, folks are just kind of tired of like I'm, the super successful person. I'm just going to tell you all the things you should do. And instead they want to be like, oh, you're the super successful person. Tell me your stories. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear how you got to where you are, not you standing on a mountain telling me you need to do these 5 things, right? There's also the element of AI. So I'm sure you've seen this. LinkedIn and other social media platforms are becoming overrun by really bad AI written content because it's really fast and easy to post it and to comment and all those things. But if you take a look at really bad AI written content, it's almost always in this like, I'm going to, let me tell you something, Ashley, like, here are the 5 things you have to do in order to X, Y, Z. Well, we don't talk like that. Like, if you and I are just hanging out, I'm not going to be like, Ashley, here are the 5 things you need to do. I'm going to be like, Ashley, the other day I was doing X and it led to Y and I learned this really cool lesson and I just thought I'd share it with you. Like, that's how people have conversations. And that's what social posts should be, in my opinion. Like, they should be, I'm hanging out with Ashley. I'm telling him a story, something I learned from work.
So Stephen, someone says, love the idea, but I'm really restricted around what I can post about what I'm doing at work. Like, we have rules that, I can't talk about the things I'm doing. I can't talk about, in that vein. I mean, one of the things that I've always thought is really useful, and I'm a huge believer in this, particularly for students, to show proof of work, to show, it's not just I'm interested in this job because it sounds cool. Like, I genuinely am interested in this stuff. Yeah. One of the things I recommend to students is to curate work. There's tons of podcasts across a range of areas of interest, across macroeconomics, across marketing, across learning, you name it, there's podcasts about it. There's tons of articles written. Curating that and saying, hey, just listen to this great podcast. These are my 3 biggest takeaways. Totally recommend you listen to it. Like, there's low friction ways to do this.
Yes, I love that, Ashley. I totally agree. I think sharing what you're learning along your journey through curation, through experiences, that's so valuable. You can synthesize information and make it easier for other folks. One of my top performing articles that I wrote on Medium, so I do some longer form content on Medium, was literally I just summarized Noah Kagan's book and pulled out the 5 things that I thought were most impactful, and it just went gangbusters. Like, it way outperformed all my other stuff because I just tied it to my personal experience as a founder, And so that was not something like, oh, I've uncovered, whatever. It's like anybody could buy this book and read it, but here I'm going to put something in front of folks that hopefully encourages them to check out this new book. And, here are 5 things that stood out to me. The other thing that I always recommend if folks are struggling with I can't talk about this or that, is doing a little bit of kind of side work, even if it's unpaid. And so one of the really interesting things that I see on LinkedIn pretty regularly is let's say that I am a content writer, right? And I want to expand my portfolio, but I can't because of the company that I work for. I can't share the things that I'm writing for that company. Well, one of the things I could do is I could pick a big brand. Let's say I picked OpenAI, and I could go to their blog or their LinkedIn post or something like that. And I could be in a very nice way, I could be hey, I rewrote this post that OpenAI just did because I think it could be better if they did X, Y, and Z. And here's why I think it could be better if they did X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden what you've done is you've taken something that's out there for public consumption, right? And you've just said hey, if hypothetical, my job was to write this in a better way, here's how I would do it. And what you're doing is you're essentially doing a little bit of work, but you're also signaling to whoever's, viewing this, if you hired me, I would deliver this same amount of value for you and your organization, and you're not violating any sort of like confidentiality or anything like that. So it's a very simple way to get more of your voice out there and demonstrate your skill set in a very tangible way.
And for students, it's so, and people early in their career or anywhere kind of really in their career, being able to do that on their own time is something that should be, plausible.
I think so. I'll throw one more out there because I do know that this is the startup of getting posting on social can be intimidating. One other area that I recommend young folks do, especially as they're trying to kind of build out their portfolio or their, things like that, go volunteer for a nonprofit. Like, go find a nonprofit that you care about and take your skill set, whatever that is, and see if you can do things for them. Right. And so that may be as simple as like if I'm a content writer, right? If I needed to build up my portfolio, I would go find a nonprofit that I really care about. And I would say like, hey, can I, for free, write your next 10 social posts? And then I would not only get the experience of writing that social post, now that's something that I can add to my portfolio. My current employer probably doesn't care because I'm volunteering for a nonprofit, and that's just helping out like, the community. And it's like a win-win-win. The nonprofit gets, your valuable skill set, et cetera. So that is a really low stakes way for you to beef up your portfolio and have things to share online. And so like, for example, when like I do a lot of career work, I volunteer with a lot of like career-based organizations, like development-based organizations. So like Junior Achievement or Year Up. These are organizations I'm really passionate about. And so I'm at a point where in my career where I don't necessarily need to like pad my portfolio for certain things, but like at Year Up, like I'll go and do like networking events where I'm like teaching, students how to network. Well, if I was trying to beef up my portfolio around like, hey, I can come in and do public speaking around networking, that's like a really low stakes way for me to not only help the students, but also, add that to my list of things that I've done. And great, I'll have somebody come with me and record it with a camera. And then I can actually send that out as like a demo reel or something like that. So nonprofit volunteering, like it is a win-win-win.
I think the important for everyone to hear, make sure your employer is okay with this. Don't try sneaking around behind people's back and doing this. Not a great idea. But, most employers I think will be cognizant that it is your personal time. And as long as you're not violating any sort of rules of the road with respect to confidentiality, by and large, I would think most people are going to be fine with that.
Important caveat, what I'll say is I've worked for some very, conservative organizations, let's say, and I've really never run into problems with any of these tactics. And as long as I'm transparent with my leader and say, here's why I'm doing it, and I'm doing it in my own time, and I'm passionate about this, and they say, go for it, go do it.
Okay, let's shift gears into our wrap-up questions here, Stephen. I really appreciate the time. I know we've had a bit of a longer chat today, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Books, podcasts you'd recommend to our audience, either in terms of, getting that dream job or accelerating your career. I mean, I'm sure you've read a lot of books and listened to a variety of podcasts, but any that sort of stand out that you'd recommend that everyone listen to or read?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw out a couple of things and I'll try to touch on maybe less well-known so that, because I'm sure most folks are probably familiar with the kind of staples of the category. So for starters, on LinkedIn, there are a number of folks who talk about really excellent career stuff. I know you share a lot of great content, so I would recommend folks follow you. And then I wrote down a couple of my favorites, so I'll go ahead and read these off real quick because I think these folks are fantastic.
And so we'll put, just so everyone knows, we'll put these links in the show notes so you don't have to worry about like scribbling all down.
Perfect. There we go. So Adam Broda is one of my favorites. I've chatted with Adam a little bit. He does really excellent career work, and he shares every single day. He's got a post talking about some angle of career, positioning, job search, things like that. Another one I really like, his name is Austin Belchak. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. What I love about Austin is his whole story is as an industry outsider, outside of tech, outside of, schools that are typically recruited from, he used these very creative ways to get his foot in the door. And he shares all of that super transparently on LinkedIn on how he approached it, how he created value before he ever walked into an interview. I really, really love his approach. And then the other one that I jotted down was Reno Perry. He's got a really big following on LinkedIn as well. And he shares tons of really valuable resources for folks who are getting started. So even if you just grab those three folks and add them to your LinkedIn newsfeed, you're already going to be grabbing little nuggets every single day that can help you with your job search and career growth and stuff like that. When it comes to podcasts, I sat down and I looked through a lot of the podcasts that I listened to. And one of the trends that I saw, and so I'll make a little bit of a sort of a strategic plug here, is unlike when I really first started my career, there were a lot of like general podcasts about career growth. So I would listen to, HBR has like IdeaCast, and I would listen to things like that. Now almost every industry and even sub-industries have their own dedicated podcasts that really go deep. And so I would actually encourage folks, if you know you want to be on a certain trajectory, go find those podcasts that are really tailored to that industry. So the example I would give here is I came from L&D, and I talk to a lot of folks who reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, I want to get into L&D. What are some of the things that I can do? Often they're, teachers or, folks who are maybe transitioning or something like that. And one of the things I almost always point them to is, he's actually a friend of mine, Andy Storch. He is prominent on LinkedIn, and he has a podcast called The Talent Development Hot Seat. And what he does is he goes and interviews, in many cases, senior leaders at different sized organizations who are running L&D teams. And he asks them a whole wide range of questions, but he calls it the hot seat because he really gets at it. Like, he's like, let's talk real, like, let's get to the real stuff. The benefit, if you're trying to break into L&D, of listening to that targeted podcast is that you are going to hear from senior leaders. What are they thinking about? What do they care about? What are the challenges that they're running into? What are their best teammates or team members doing in order to advance the organization? Those are all incredibly valuable. And so that's really like my big recommendation from podcasts is like, yes, there are going to be, the sort of catch-alls, and those are really important, right? So listen to Career Starter, like, listen to these ones that are talking about, broad-based stuff, because that's so important. But also don't miss the opportunity to supplement that with your niche and really getting into what's important there. And then my last little thing would be like, use AI to accelerate your learning in this regard. You can, take a podcast, transcribe it, right? And then throw it into ChatGPT and be like, give me the top 5 takeaways. And then boom, you got that. And then if you want to go deeper into the podcast, right, obviously you can. So that's my little plug.
That's great. One of the things that we're doing with this podcast, kind of along those lines, is that we're building a Notion page. Mm-hmm. That has the top 3 takeaways, the book recommendations. And so you'd actually go through and find all the stuff from the people who have been guests on the show. And the link to that will be in the show notes. We've just finally put it together. We've just recorded a few podcasts now, so you'll see the link in the show notes. So I totally recommend people check that out too. That's super interesting though. I don't think I've had someone mention the very industry specific ones to that degree. So that's great insight.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I wish I had even when I started in L&D, which was maybe 10-ish years ago. I remember looking and I couldn't find anything. And then all of a sudden, within a span of a couple of years, it was like every niche now has its own podcast. And I think that's just been the proliferation of podcasts and content creators and things like that. But I would be hard pressed. I mean, you'd have to be a real small niche industry to not be able to find something that delivers value for you specifically.
I'll say one thing though, listening to sort of as I think about a thread through this conversation, which we didn't explicitly describe, is I think it's harder in the world we live in today to go along and just kind of meander and be like, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be like moderately good at this. I'm going to be like meh, and hope to have like a successful long-term career, to be in demand, to have the opportunities that people will typically want. I do think that you need to have this approach and view of, I want to become great at this role, or at the role I'm going into, or I want to aspire to have. Because I just think that it's too competitive now to be like, yeah, I'll just, move along and, I'll go from this job to that job. You may be okay. Like you may end up having a career, but it's unlikely to be the career where you have this rapid trajectory without sort of having that sort of mindset.
I 100% agree. And that's part of why I talk about development so much is if I can take a quick minute to break down one last concept that I talk about on LinkedIn pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. I call it the learning cliff. And I call it the learning cliff because for most professionals, when they leave their formal education, typically end of university, maybe they go to grad school, something like that. I describe this cliff that they fall off of, which is they had been spending a very large amount of time learning, and then they enter into the workforce and they don't continue that learning progression. They fall off of a cliff. And they do it because, and I don't know if a lot of folks realize this, when you are in a formal learning environment, much of the learning structure is done for you. So if you're in university, right, your professor is telling you what book to read, which sections to read, which topics to think about, what's going to be on the test. When you're out on your own, you have to figure those things out. So most of us can't afford and don't have the time, et cetera, to just continually like keep getting degree, or, investing in like really expensive courses or things like that. So how do you continue to progress your career without just falling off that cliff? And that's why I think the develop daily concept is so important, because if you don't do that, then what you're going to do is you're going to leave your formal education. You're going to fall off that cliff, And then all of a sudden, your skill set, given the speed of change, given the new environment that we're in, it's going to start atrophying really quickly in a way that I think is going to start shocking folks as the speed just keeps increasing. I think it's become more and more surprising of how quickly your skill set goes out of date in a way that even 20 years ago wasn't the case. Like, I talk to folks from my parents' generation and I look at like what their career trajectory looked like. And it was like, you go to university, you learn the basics, and then you're good. You get in your career field. You could carry that career field for 40, 50 years if you wanted to, and you'll be fine. I just really don't see that anymore. I don't think that that's realistic. So I 100% agree with you. I think the only way that you are going to have an above average, an excellent career is if you do one of two things. You either do the route that I see a lot of folks do, which is they just work all the time, right? And that's one way that you can get ahead. The other is the route that I'm trying to take, which is how do I work smarter, not harder? How do I leverage AI? How do I leverage technology? How do I leverage what I know about career development and skill set? How do I, train myself to be able to absorb things quickly in order to be able to move on opportunities without having to work a million hours? Like, I have a 4 and 5-year-old. I'm not willing to put in those kind of hours. So my only other solution is either to allow my career to kind of become very average or to figure out creative ways. And so to sort of like come full circle, what I talk about on LinkedIn, and I have a newsletter called Develop Daily, is I talk about those experiments that I'm doing. I talk about the ways that I am trying to work smarter, not harder, in order to have an excellent career without having to put in 80-hour weeks every week.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting that it occurs to me now. I've thought about this a little bit before, but it really hit me as we're talking. It's been 2.5 years since ChatGPT hit the scene. We touched on that.
Yeah.
We're approaching the point, I think, where if you're a student today, you have to be using this. Yeah. You have to, and I don't mean that like to write your essays for you. Right. You have to be good at milking the value out of these programs and these LLMs. And if this has only been 2.5 years, like picture 10 years from now.
That's right.
It's going to be like baseline required. And it's actually, so it makes it even more important, I would think, for students and people early in their career to be spending some time like becoming familiar, basic, being basically conversant with these tools.
I agree. The last thing that I'll add on the AI conversation is try not to let the fear. I see so much sort of fear-based headlines, fear-based conversation. And what I try to remind folks when I talk to them, at least in my viewpoint, is let's roll back the clock, maybe even 5 years, right? If you are in your career and you're not using the internet to be smarter, then you are already behind, right? If you're not Googling things, watching YouTube videos, whatever that looks like for you, you were already behind. If you were just relying on like, oh, I'm going to grab a book every once in a while, or I'm just going to chat with people, you were already behind. Well, AI has in many ways just kind of supplemented or replaced whatever that other way of using the internet to tap into knowledge was, right? So it's not that, oh no, we're like in doomsday scenario. I don't know, maybe we are, who knows? But it's more that the best, most efficient way to get to the heart of what you need is now likely through something like AI, rather than like when I came up, it was, are you really good at like Boolean searches on Google? Like, could you jump into Google and find the stuff you need really quickly? Well, now Google itself is integrating AI right into the search feature. I don't know if you've seen this. Not only is it like you search something and the AI is the first thing that pops up, but I just got an alert from Google that added me to some like beta they're doing, which is like literally a supplemental chat window that goes alongside your search. So not only are you searching, but it's like they have ChatGPT like embedded right next to it. So Google even gets it. They know that how people find information is going to change. It's going to be much more natural language. It's not going to be these Boolean searches, et cetera. So when I hear these kind of like doomsday scenarios, I'm kind of like, is this really all that different than us using? It's a more efficient way to get to the information, but it still is, if you are pursuing all of the vast information that's out there on the internet, you're going to be ahead. Now, how you pursue it, that's what's changing. Use AI. It's way more efficient, right? And that's why I encourage folks to experiment with AI, because if you're still doing the Google search, well, there's somebody else who's using AI and doing it faster, or you could be doing it faster. And then you can choose how you want to spend your time otherwise, like go hang out with your kids if you're me, or, like go hang out with your friends or do whatever, or invest more in work, whatever you want to do. Like that's the power of, I think, modern AI.
It's a little bit like, should I Google search this or should I go look at my 30-year-old encyclopedia.
Right. So when I haven't posted this in a while, but if you go back and look through like my old content, you'll find a Perplexity user guide that I put out back before Perplexity was like super, the big thing. And the first line that I used is, my little tagline in my LinkedIn post was like, I haven't used Google search in months. Here's why, or something like that. And it was like, no, I've just literally replaced like Google search with Perplexity. I'm still doing the same thing. I'm just using a different tool because it's way more efficient. But I don't know about it.
Stephen, so much value in this conversation. I pay a lot of attention to this stuff, and I learned a ton of stuff in this conversation. I think our audience is going to really, really benefit from this. And so first off, I just really want to thank you so much for taking the time in this conversation. Before I let you go, how can people find you?
Thank you for having me on, Ashley. This was great. I love talking about this stuff. So it's, fun for me to geek out on it. Yeah, I would love for folks to come hang out with me on LinkedIn or check out my Develop Daily newsletter, which you can find on my profile on LinkedIn. You can feel free to add that to the show notes. And then otherwise, please reach out if there's anything I can do to help you with AI, writing, your career development. I like talking to folks. So, I'm a teacher at heart. So, it's like when folks reach out and they're like, how do I do this? Or like, can we chat? Or like, whatever, like, please reach out because I would love to talk to folks who are looking to grow their career.
I love it. So all this stuff will be in the show notes. Stephen, great chatting with you. Look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Ashley. Have a good one.
Thank you, you too.